to the place where singles shine, celebrating life, divine by design. In faith and love, we intertwine. Route 77, where your journey's prime.
Welcome back to the Route 77 podcast. Today we're tackling a topic that touches all of us at some point: anger. Whether it's general frustration or specific to our singleness, anger can shape our relationships and perspectives significantly. We'll delve into how anger manifests, especially in singleness, its roots, its impact, and how we might find ourselves angry with God or the expectations placed upon us. Let's unpack these feelings and seek understanding and peace together. Welcome to the Route 77 podcast. I am your host, Natasha, and I am here with Monique.
Hello.
And David.
Hello.
And we are here to talk about something that we all love to talk about: anger. And I think about this even in specifically with singleness, but also just in general as a person. But in singleness, there can be a lot of anger at the fact that you haven't found the one, or that you're not married, you don't have kids, and there can be a lot of anger and resentment that can be built up towards God, towards yourself, towards others, towards the church and society and all these things, and it's not healthy. But we want to have a discussion about that. I think I have definitely felt a lot of anger at not being married when I expected to, especially when you're told that's what you're supposed to do to be a highest calling woman. And it didn't happen, and I was very angry at God, at the world, at just, I don't know, everything, because it hadn't happened. And what were you supposed to do when you're told this is what the best life is and you don't get it? Yeah, very, very frustrating thing, and left to a lot of anger, a lot of years of anger, and didn't probably help my mindset whenever I met my ex. You're willing to overlook a lot to get the thing you think you're supposed to have. So that's my view on it. How about you guys?
My anger was different. Mine was not so much that I wasn't married, but that the person I married was so bad. And I don't like to use that word necessarily because we don't want to label people as bad. He's gone past this world, so I don't think it matters anymore. But he was not a nice person, and he had a lot of addiction issues. And I was mad at myself because I had looked only at the superficial without looking into the deeper aspects of what he was like. And then after he was gone, then I had the fear of finding somebody who is just like him or worse. And so I shied away from relationships. And then I think I was more angry that I couldn't find a loving person. There was just nothing there anymore. Like it was like I had nothing left inside of me, even to give to somebody if they were somebody to be in a relationship with. I felt totally empty and devoid of any emotional, loving feelings or anything like that for a relationship. I shut down. I don't know. David, what about you, David?
I'm not exactly sure how to answer this question for myself.
It doesn't have to be about being single per se, but have you experienced like real anger in your life for things, or had to deal with it in some fashion?
So the closest, not even then really, the closest, I think, to be honest, the only time I've actually felt any kind of anger towards another human being is probably after I came to Christ. Before that, I was almost void of any kind of emotion towards anything or anyone. And when I finally came to Christ, I began to actually experience what love was, and anger and sadness and grief. And so I think the closest time that I was angry enough that may not have been justified was when my father was beaten in the park, and I was furiously angry at the people who had done it. But even then, as I was contemplating, or I guess in a sense meditating on that anger, I began to realize, like, what is this even meant for? What's the point of this? What value this kind of anger have any purpose? Like, it doesn't change anything, right? So I think that is the closest time that I've been angry at someone else or other people, but it dissipated. It just went away real fast because I realized that there's no point in being angry at these people. These people don't know any better. Humans don't. Humans can't contemplate or do anything any better, really. We're all. I think most of us are always angry at something, one thing or another, even if we don't even realize it. So it just faded away and it melted into some like, why did this happen? Like, why are these people acting this way? Then it just ended up in prayer being like, Lord, why? Help me understand why this happened. Right? So it melted into from anger to understanding, like trying to understand why these things happen the way they do, why these things occur. And I always end up going back to scripture to see, it's not because of God, it's not because God desired these things, it's because of us humans. We're always in a state of imperfection and we're always making mistakes. And all of this anger happened that is probably the closest thing I've experienced to absolute anger towards another being. Now, I do experience anger at myself because I do sin, and every time I see myself sinning or being tempted, I get very angry, not at myself, but at the actions or at, say, the flesh, because it's very frustrating and it drives me mad. But I always have to go back to scripture and I always pray, Lord, take this away. And I am unbelievably, you have no idea how unbelievably excited I am to have a new body. Can I get it now, please? But
Don't be in too much of a rush to leave this world. We still want you around. Yes.
I know. It's always the Lord will be done. But I think the biggest form of anger that I do struggle with is anger towards the actions that I commit or the thoughts that I think, and then towards the flesh and just in generally stuff that I do. I think that's the biggest anger kind of thing, and I get very angry on that.
To be fair, there are many times where I prayed the same thing. So, Lord, are you coming back soon? I don't want this body anymore.
In the midst of my nerve pain, I can totally understand it.
When I can't walk because I've been doing way too much jumping in Taekwondo that my old body says, why are you doing this to me? Yeah, I get that. And I think you're not alone in that because there are so many people. My dad, who has had degenerative arthritis pretty much his whole entire life, and now is having to deal with dementia. He went in one of his more lucid moments, had confessed that he wished that he had a different body. Dad, I know how you can get one. It's really hard for people to imagine having the eternal body when you're suffering with your temporal body.
So there's so many ways that we can feel anger, and it can be towards God, others, ourselves. It can be just even having to deal with situations, having to deal with your own actions. There's so many things. And for us, yeah, like some of my anger, or I was told my whole life I had anger issues, but I think that there's more that stems from that. When you see even kids with anger issues, it's not just because they are naturally like that, like personality-wise, it's just something they were born with. I think it's something that develops from root causes. And for me, a lot of mine came from basically not feeling like I was allowed to have an opinion. And it developed one in school. Like anytime you showed that you liked or disliked something, it was used against you by the other kids. Partly the way I was taught growing up, how to live at peace with everyone was to just allow other people to do what they wanted as long as it wasn't a sin. So you just didn't create any division or any waves by stating an opinion that might be different than other people's, just so that you kept the peace as long as it wasn't a sin issue. And then again, when I got into my marriage, it was just like everything. It was just like in school, it was used against me. Everything that I liked, everything I disliked was all used against me. So you had to like constantly just go with like you had no opinion. So I just like that for 40 years of basically not having an opinion. And all of a sudden, when I went through counseling and was allowed to essentially have an opinion and be validated that I do have an opinion and that it's okay to state my opinions on things, and It's okay to say, I'd like to go to this restaurant, or no, I don't want to do that today, or whatever. And then it resolved a lot of these anger issues that I had. So there can be a lot of root issues. And I
Yep.
think that's the biggest thing when we're talking about anger. Because one of the verses that we can talk about is in Ephesians 4:26-27. In your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you're still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold. But even when it says, in your anger, do not sin, it actually shows you, it doesn't say, when you're angry, you're sinning. But it says, while you are in your anger, do not sin. I think a lot of it has to do with, like, why are you angry? And what are you doing with that anger? And we often cite Jesus tossing the tables at the temple and things like that. And yes, like, he was angry, but he was angry because it was dishonoring of his father. And he was correcting the situation. And yet, I don't think we're called to physically manhandle every person that we might be righteously angry at. I think it depends on the situation. But I think there was times when Jesus told the disciples off. Like, why are you keeping those children from me? Or like, why are you sleeping? Or why did you not have faith? And things like that. It was done in love, even if he might have been like frustrated or angry at the situation. And he could have been like the mother of all angry people thing when he was dying on the cross for no reason, in a sense where he was not guilty of it. So he had a right to be angry at the situation. We would be angry at the situation. We're like, how could they do that? Look at all the laws that they just trampled all over. Look at all of the things that they lied about. Like, how angry would that make you? And yet Jesus did not sin in all of that. He just said that forgive them, for they know not what they do. It's just a lot of, it has a lot to do with, I think, the root of your anger and then what you do with it. I'm going to quote Adventures in Odyssey for a minute. I know it's been a little while, but they talk about,
I believe you're quoting Adventures in Odyssey. I don't think I've ever heard of any quotes from Adventures in Odyssey.
never. So they have this one episode called Right, Wrongs, and Reasons when it comes down to really looking at things, because he says there's doing the right things for the right reason, the wrong things for the right reason, things for the wrong reason, and the wrong things for the wrong reason. The only things that we should be doing are the right things for the right reason. But if we actually take things and look at it and you ask yourself, what am I doing and why am I doing it?
What are you doing? Why are you doing it?
Is it the right thing for the right reason? Or you might be going, but I'm doing the right thing, but your reason or your reason you're doing it is wrong. And so that really helps, I think, in a lot of situations, but it can help in an anger situation to understand if you're sinning in that anger, what am I angry at and what am I doing with it? So am I doing the right thing of being angry for the right reason?
A lot of times people don't recognize the reason why they're angry.
No.
Because anger can come from it's in psychology, it's considered a secondary emotion. It's a normal emotion, and it related to the fight, flight, or freeze response of our nervous system for a protection thing. A lot of times we don't realize that. Am I under stress? Am I feeling frustrated? Is this is not right feeling, like justice kind of thing? A lot of times we don't, when we're angry, we don't have time to sit there and go, hang on a minute. I need you to stop and wait for a minute. I'm feeling angry. I need to find out why. So can you just pause while I go into my internal self and have a talk and ask myself, why am I feeling angry at this moment? A lot of times we're just, all of a sudden we're in that emotion. But one of the things that I was taught is that how quickly are you getting angry at things? Like, if your anger level is always sitting at an 8, then any small thing is going to set you off, and you're going to be exploding all over people, spraying them with your anger. But if you're sitting at a 2 or a 3, then it might take a little bit before somebody's actions or whatever will cause you to feel anger. So knowing where you're sitting, there are so many anger tests. that
Well,
you
I
can
think,
take.
like, when you see, like, when I was talking about my anger issue, like, I was always on the verge of being angry because everything was being, like, washed down so much for so long that I was just at bubbling point, like, all the
Yes.
time.
So that's something that you recognized and realized, wait a minute, I'm angry all the time. Why am I angry all the time? And
It did take
then
me, like, 20 years to figure that out.
it's amazing that a lot of us around our age area, give or take, whatever, we were brought up to not, you were supposed to be seen, not heard. If your parents got mad at you, you were not permitted to talk back to them, because if you talked back to them, it was either the shoe got thrown at you or the spoon got whacked at you, or you just learned to bite back your anger and your feelings of injustice or whatever for being as kids. And then you grow up into teenagers. And if you're raised in that, then you grow up as a timid teenager, and then bullies come after you, and then you do the same thing. And this is something that parents should keep an eye out for, is if you've got a child who doesn't seem to be acting their normal self for whatever reason, that they may now be a target of a bully.
And I think too, if you have people and you're gonna, like, in your labeling, like, your child having an anger issue, I think that's not helping the situation because
No,
you're just pushing it off as if it's a them problem and that they just have to stop. And just stopping angry isn't really the answer. Like,
no,
because you get in
no.
trouble for having an anger issue, and then it's just stop being so angry all the time. And
That's not the,
you have a wound, even though you have a splinter in there that's not coming out. Like, how come this wound is not getting any better? Just get better. And yet you have an underlying thing that's in there.
oh, I'm sorry your bone is broken. Can you just fix it and go on?
Yeah.
What? You
Like,
can't deal with things like that. You can put as many band-aids as you want on that knife wound that's seeping blood all over the place. It ain't gonna work. Because that's a lot of times when you are hurt, is what it feels like, is that you are being stabbed, you're bleeding everywhere, and people just want to put a band-aid on it and pretend it doesn't exist.
There is a lesson Jesus taught on the Sermon on the Mount when he said, "You shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment.
Hmm.
Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, Raka, is answerable to the court. And anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fire of hell." Now, one of the things that I noticed here was that he's equating what I'm going to call unjustified anger with murder. So he's seriously signifying the seriousness of actual harboring of anger, and in which it can lead to life being lost. And a perfect example of this would be Cain and Abel. Cain, again, just to reiterate a well-known story, Cain offered something that God wasn't too pleased with, and Abel offered something God was pleased with. And in this return, Cain became very angry. And this was demonstrated because the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast?" And this harboring of anger towards, I think it was towards Abel, because God was more pleased with Abel. So Cain didn't actually, from what I can read, I could be wrong, you guys could tell me wrong, but Cain seemed to harbor his anger towards Abel and not God, because Abel God took favor on Abel, more or less Cain. And the harboring of this anger led to Cain probably killing his own brother. And I think there's a parallel to the Sermon on the Mount and then Cain and Abel, when Jesus equates unjustified anger with murder. So I
Yeah.
think it's very important that we understand that when we do get angry, we have to reconcile if it's with someone else and figure out what is the cause of the anger, like you said, very quickly. But then there's also, like you mentioned, Natasha, too, there's justified anger. And that's Christ flipping the tables over in the market.
Yeah.
So you'll see justified anger a lot less than you would do unjustified anger, but I think it's important to understand both of those.
And a lot of people are going to say, why was Abel's sacrifice so much better than Cain's? And I don't think that was the issue as much as Cain's attitude, where his was jealousy and resentment.
Like
So he
Abel
was,
obeyed God in what he was to give as an offering, and Cain did not. And
yeah.
and so it was more like, if he can give what he wants, like, why can't I get? And he could have easily have traded Abel what he had. I think when we come to the general anger issue itself, is that, yeah, like, we have to really understand what it is that we're being angry at, or who and why. And then again, then you need to understand what it is that we're doing with that. And
Right.
as I discussed at the beginning, for me, there was a lot of anger around my singleness because the church told me I was supposed to be married with kids in order to be fulfilled as a woman, as a true Christian woman, and it wasn't happening. God, what are you doing? You're supposed to be doing this. So there was a
Why
lot
didn't
of,
you fulfill this mandate?
it was an anger at God, but then anger at this expectation within the church that I wanted it, but there was no direction or encouragement if you didn't get it. A lot of my anger was towards God at more than the church, I think, because I was thinking like, hey, this is what I believe is right and true, and I want it, and I know you want it, so why are you not bringing it around? And
Mhm.
there was a lot of anger there, and a lot of anger in just my situation because it was going on for year after year. I had no plans for a career. I was just trying to go. I went to university, a Christian university, to find a guy. It didn't happen. That was the only reason I went. I didn't have any plans to use my education degree or anything. It was just nothing after nothing. And then my littlest brother, who's 7 years younger than me, suddenly like barely goes to college, and then he's getting married and he's having kids right away. And it was
Yep.
just like, I love my nieces and nephews to bits. And at the time, it was so hard because, like, I loved my nephew Simon, like, the first one, like, 'cause he was just him at the time, so much, and yet I was struggling so much with the fact that my baby brother had a child, and I was still not even married.
Right.
A lot of anger, frustration at God, at the church. I don't know if I would say society as a whole, because I always consider myself separate from society. That's not what I want, is what they want, but that is a societal pressure, whether or not I specifically thought about it that way. But we look at every single movie, almost, we talked about this last time, just like how many people always, your character is never considered complete unless there's a love interest of whatever sort they decide.
Right.
There's just something always missing, and we're taught that. We're taught that in our romance novels. We're taught that in society, in our entertainment. We're taught that in all of these ways, and then
Yeah.
we're subconsciously taught it. And then when it doesn't happen, there's a lot of anger.
Yep. I basically did this, even though I didn't grow up in the church. My desire was that I was going to be married and have kids. So I did the same thing. Like, I went to a secondary college and learned some office skills because I just wanted to get a job that I could just pass by with until I got married so that I could just stay home and take care of kids, because that was my purpose in life. Yeah, that's me how that worked out for me. My brother, same thing, the second oldest, married, 4 daughters. The last one just graduated. They're still married. His oldest daughter is engaged. His oldest daughter with his wife she's an RN in the NICU ward in the hospital in Calgary. And I'm just like, wow, I really missed the boat. Did I just step off the side of it and drown? What the heck? My whole thing was that I was going to get married, have kids, be a grandmother. Yeah.
All kit and caboodle.
Yeah. So I had a different anger that was more centered at me rather than at God, because I thought there was something wrong with me.
Would it be like anger at your contentment?
No, no, I literally thought that there was something seriously wrong with me, that I'm just not one of those attractive enough people for somebody to want to be with. But then after my abusive relationship, I think I also probably put up a wall that said, I'm not approachable. Don't approach me. Don't come near me because I don't trust you. So there is always that too. Who knows where it all went out?
Were you a believer at this time?
I was not. I didn't become a believer until 1991. I was already in my 20s. Like I think I was 26. So
What you were explaining reminded me of like the trust that you had in God's plan for your life, and you were more or less putting trust into your own life, and you were getting angry about that.
yeah. When after I was in a relationship because I had my daughter, and after I became a Christian, the brand, and I say that word very loosely, convinced me horrifically. Let me say she didn't convince me. She guilted me into breaking off with my daughter's father because he didn't believe in getting married without actually. So she literally broke up a family that should have been worked on getting together, not tearing apart. And that left me open to probably a worse situation, the greatest thing either. But I should have had the opportunity through that and not being guilted out of it, because that left me vulnerable and I got into a worse relationship with a guy I thought was a Christian because I thought that's what I needed to do.
And that's what I did. I took that desperation and anger, and I was willing to do whatever it took to get that
Right.
Mrs. Even when I was going through that decade-long abuse, all I could think of, at least I'm married. That's all that I hung on to. At least I'm married.
Yeah.
And then when my ex said he wanted to leave and not be married anymore, that's when it shook everything. It just like torpedoed all my foundation, which is how I found out that my foundation was not on God. And it wasn't even on our marriage. It was just on the fact that I was married and that I didn't want to lose that, because then what was I?
Yeah.
And so
So that
it brings you to a whole situation where you're willing to compromise, you're willing to look at past red flags, you're willing to do whatever it takes. Maybe the right thing in the sense that you wanted to be the loyal wife and you wanted to do all the things you're supposed to do, but it was for the wrong reason of just trying to fit this relationship, fix this
Did you-
relationship status thing.
Did you ever get told, how do you know that you won't love them into heaven?
No.
Because that
Most
works.
people didn't want me to be with him in any way.
Oh,
But
you were
I
fortunate.
had a lot of people tell me, for the guys that I was not attracted to, that attraction doesn't mean everything. You can come to find them attractive later. I was told that one a lot.
Yeah, I'd heard that one too.
Meanwhile,
Well,
all these people, married people, they were attracted to, whatever.
yeah.
They're pretty much willing to throw everything under the bus. So, and as long as I got married, they were willing to even push aside all of these things so long as I got married to a Christian guy. That's all that mattered to them.
Yeah. But you never know what kind of person, but the attraction there has to be something.
But it's just they were willing to tell me to give up on things, to do whatever it took to get me married off. Really.
Yeah.
As long if the person was a Christian person, that's all that mattered to them, to the people in general in the church. Like it didn't matter anything else. If they're a good Christian person, it didn't have to be a fake
he's not eye and he uses a walker and he's got no teeth. No, he's
You can
Christian.
kind of love them in 5 years that he might have left if you're lucky. It's
No, like
ridiculous. And you wonder why we end up with some of these complex, like freaking, it's just, you can't even.
and there's a whole other ball of anger wax that we've got. I just want to take this ball of anger wax. I just want to throw it at your head because you're talking nonsense. I'm sorry. Stop it.
Yeah. And that's why I really want to, it says in 1 Corinthians 7:17, nevertheless, each person should live as a believer in whatever situation the Lord has assigned to them, just as God called them. And that's talking about living where you are in the moment and being content and not angry at where you are in the moment. provided that you're like living. I think there's
The
a
Christian
sense where you
life.
can be angry at yourself where you've made decisions and why you're there, but again, you have to do something with that's positive. But it's
Isn't that
just
more isn't that more focused on if you on like food, clothing, water, just basic things you need, where
yeah,
God
but
is saying you
I
do not
think
worry about these
relationships
things, for even God feeds the birds of the sky and whatnot. How much more
I just
valuable
think
are
like
you as a
relationship
human?
status falls into there too, though. If whatever period of time that God's called you into, whether it's singleness, marriage, divorced, widowhood, maybe God's not called you into divorce, but it has happened and he's called you to live a
There
godly
you
life.
are.
That you need to, if you're being angry because you're single or that you're not a parent yet, then that's not being content where you are, and that's having anger in a situation where God's called you to live in that moment. They should live as a believer. So that like, is that really Christ-like to live in anger because you're not married, to live in anger because you're not a mom or a dad? It's not what God calls us to do. It does, and it says things like finding a wife in your youth is a good thing. Having a quiver full of children is a good thing. But it's never you should be angry if you don't get this.
It shouldn't be the end all. And we have to stop also ascribing so much Old Testament things like that in the New Testament world, because everybody is so worried and concerned that the birth rate is dropping. We have 8 billion people in the earth. I haven't said this before, but I should tell you now. We have 8 billion people on this earth. We have no lack of people on this earth. We have no lack of people having babies on this earth.
You don't
This
have to
is
fix
not,
it all yourself.
oh my word. Every time I hear, oh, we're so upset the birth rate is dropping, don't worry about it. You're not going to die off. There is over 4 billion of you. You're fine. You're it, it just drives me bonkers when I see these, oh, our birth rate is the lowest it's ever been. So what? We have 32 million people who live in Canada, and we're taking more people in, and these people have kids. We're fine. We're good. We're not going to die off. The people are not going to, I'm pretty sure the people are not going to die off the face of this planet anytime soon. It's just
Hard to live where you like in the moment that you're in, but live as a believer. I don't recall any of the verses that say, "Thou shalt be angry if you find thyself single."
Yeah.
For
I
Jesus was both.
And maybe this is,
Well, Jesus had all of us as children.
Human person, he was single, and as a human person, he did not have kids.
and he had no desire for it because it wasn't his thing. It wasn't his calling. If you're a single person and this is such an issue for you that it's making you feel so angry that you're not having this thing, maybe you need to ask yourself why you want it so badly. And if it is a fear of being alone, find people, find friends. I had that living alone in my, Cheetah went out, living alone in my condo. I was always afraid that what happens if I pass away and nobody knows that I've been dead for a week, smelling up the apartment like a
Toy.
If that's your fear, then find a roommate. I did. If I die, she'll know and she'll call the appropriate people and have me buried. I found her in her bedroom. It's all good. Write that on tombstone.
We're just friends.
We're just friends. I heard this from one of my coworkers. She had a husband and wife. They slept in separate rooms. She passed away, and he didn't find out about it until he came back home later in the afternoon. She died by herself. I'm afraid to be alone because what if I die and nobody knows? Nobody knew she died until he came home from work. I know another couple, same thing. She didn't know that her husband had an aneurysm until she found out that he never showed up for work. So she went home to find him on the floor. Things are going to happen to you. And most of the time it's going to happen to you when you're alone.
And ultimately, if you pass away, it won't matter anymore.
You're not going to care anymore anyway. So
You're with Jesus at that point.
hopefully you're with Jesus at that point. Choose this day whom you will serve.
Yes.
Yes. Because, ultimately, if you're with Jesus, you're never alone because he
No.
is always with you 24/7. He's always with you.
In Psalm 62, verse 8, trust in him at all times. You people, pour out your hearts to him, for God is our refuge. And I think there's a point where we can take our anger and pour it out to God and the fact that we are angry.
Oh, he's got pretty big shoulders. He can take it.
Yes. But I think the
I-
biggest point is that we actually sit back and listen. Listen to what he has to say once we get it off our chest.
I remember this one time I had this girlfriend that I'd met through abuse counseling. She was separated from her husband, had 2 kids. And her and I, we got along really good. We were both born on the same day. We were both crazy. It was great. And she had grown up in the Jehovah's Witness faith. And I remember one day, I don't know what it was, but I just felt just this overwhelming need to pray for her. And literally on the floor, weeping in tears, praying like crazy. And I just felt such a relief afterwards because I felt like I had just poured out my soul and I just gave it all to God and went, oh, I feel so much better now. And she did come to Christ after that. I took her to church, freaked her out because it was communion. And I don't know if you know anything about Jehovah's Witnesses. They don't do communion unless you're part of the 144,000. I'd like to know how they know that. And then she asked me, do you believe in the Trinity? Yeah, I believe in the Trinity. But she kept coming to church with me. And then she had her own conversion thing. And then she brought her husband to Christ and he had his own conversion thing. And then they started a marriage counseling and did that for a number of years before God called her home. You never know what's going to happen when you pour out your soul, your heart and soul to God.
And sometimes, there's a relief when you can do that.
Yeah.
But like only if you're willing to receive
Because
afterward. Because
yeah.
if you're just going to, like any person, if you get angry, if you're just going to go blah, 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 and then stalk off and never have anything to do with them, like you're not going to have any resolution whatsoever. But sometimes we talk about ranting. I just need to vent to somebody like Monique. I'll be like, this happened at work or whatever. And she can sometimes have some advice, but sometimes she knows I just need to get it out.
I have no idea what
You okay? And you're like, I don't.
You need a hug.
So sometimes you just need to get things off with God. You can get it off your chest and you can just get it out there. And then you need to open up your mind and your heart and your soul to what he has to say to you. Sometimes he might reprimand you. Sometimes he might hug you spiritually. Sometimes he might not say anything because all you needed to do was say it. And then you realize in the saying of it what the answer was. But he never turns away the heart of a person looking for him.
Yeah.
And he'll never turn you away empty.
Like that time when Amber was having her surgery to have the brain tumor removed. And the doctor came through and had to whisk her off to a CT scan because he was concerned about a brain bleed. And I knew what that meant. And I was terrified. And all I could do was just grab onto Jesus' robes and just say, Lord, please, and I don't even know, I'm just going to hang on to the very edge of your robe because I don't know what else to do. But the peace that he pours onto you in those times, regardless of which way that situation could have gone, I just knew that he was there, even if I couldn't hear from him because my anguish was too great to hear anything. And the relief, which he came back and everything was fine.
And I think too, like for me, when it came to relationships, it wasn't until I had completely released that idol of marriage, but whenever I was able to release that out of me, the anger went out that I wasn't married, the anger went out that I wasn't a mom. And once I was able to release that to Christ and to God, that it wasn't until then that once I was able to release the anger, release the pain, release the unmet expectations, all those things within me, it wasn't until then that I was able to embrace my singleness, embrace not being a parent, but embrace what I am doing now to like such a fullness. Like I could not be teaching at a Taekwondo school with children around me all day long and little babies coming in with their parents if I had not turned that corner, if I had not released that anger and resentment and frustration. I was just living, it was eating me in from the inside. And if I had not released that with God's help and a lot of counseling, which was also with God's help, I couldn't even begin to be living. I always feel like I didn't begin living until I was 40, and that's not right. I
No.
didn't I can't even, it's hard to explain if you haven't gone through it, but it's like a light switch.
Yeah.
Like everything was
Yeah.
dark and everything was light. That's how much it changed and almost how quickly it changed.
Yeah.
And
It took me a lot longer because I was maybe just near the end of my 40s before that light switch started to turn on. And it was slow and coming too. And then once I found my niche, it was just like, okay, then we ran full bore. Could I have not have found this out when I was in my 30s, when I
I
still
know,
had
right? In my 20s.
Actually,
So-
when I was in my 20s, I did wish I could do Taekwondo or some sort of martial arts then, because I was so full of anger over the injustice of what was happening in my life. And I wanted to beat people up so badly. So maybe it's a good thing I didn't take. I'd have been in trouble. That's probably a good idea that I waited until I've calmed down. Took me a long time to calm down.
But when you actually get to that point, it's, I know for me, I'm like, why did I waste so much of my life being
Exactly.
angry and
Yes.
resentful and frustrated? It was a lot of emotional work for nothing.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is. It was a whole lot of stuff for nothing. Wasted all those years on nothing. And people say, no, it's not justified because you're hurting yourself. And whoever it is that you're angry at, they don't care. They really don't care. So why are you bothering being
Just like
angry?
David was upset when that stuff happened to his dad, which is totally justifiable. You're upset. That's totally understandable. But he could have been angry at them forever, but they would not have affected their lives one bit. David?
Right.
Yeah, one of the things that actually really helps me was Eschatologist, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. The book where I believe it's King Solomon goes through what it means to live life without God. He makes it very clear that it doesn't matter if you're wise, smart, intelligent, in love or not in love, if you're angry or not angry, we all end up at the same place in the end. We all end up in front of God and we're being judged for what we did. And that's not just the evil that we do, it's also the good. One of the last things, his conclusion, for God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil. So that's one of the things. It's like, why should I be angry at this stuff? It's not like it's going to change my outcome.
Right.
So, and then you got to look at that and then look at the life of Jesus and how he represented himself. And I think a lot of people don't realize that God actually understands our pain and suffering. He goes through this when he's in the garden in the solitude where he's distressed and he's asking his father for a different path, but ultimately submits to his will, for the Father's will.
Mhm.
And he shows pain and suffering as well, his understanding through, what was his name? Lazarus' tomb, where he was showing compassion and understanding of human grief and frustration as he wept. So God definitely understands our pain and suffering. And I don't think people quite understand, in a sense, that God actually does understand. So it's okay, like you said, to blurt out your anger towards him, your frustration towards God, and ask him for understanding, all that.
I think part of it is because there's so little written about him in the Gospels. You have to think that this man lived 33 years. He had a lot of days of things that he could have gone through. We don't know what he lost his father, Joseph, because we don't hear about him after his birth or when he was 12 years old. And his brothers all scorned him because they didn't believe who he was. And so he suffered. But we don't think about that kind of thing because we don't hear about his childhood, his young adulthood prior to, after 12, And then when he reached the age of when he had to start his mission.
My point was, Monique, is that a lot of we go in and saying, oh, Jesus is God, is Jesus, he's the Word of God. So we're portraying Jesus as God like we should, but that also, in a sense, I don't think people fully grasp with that, that he was also human.
And that's
Point.
the point I was making, is that we forget that he was also human on this earth, even though he's still God.
Yeah, so I think we could keep talking on this a
Wow.
lot, but then people might. I think we should bring this one to a close. I think we had a lot of good conversations and a lot of discussion about anger and where it can come from and what you do with it. But yeah, I
Did
think
you
we
wanna-
should just maybe one of the things to talk about at the end is just Philippians 4:6-7. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. It's like ultimately, even when you're going through this anger, even if it's directed at God, bring all of what you are and who you are and how you're feeling and what you want and like all this is bring it before God. And he'll never leave it empty. He may not fulfill it in the way that you want it to, but he'll fulfill it in the way that's best.
Yeah. Come as you are, not how you think you should be.
That's why I said you can be angry, but you gotta be willing to be open to the response.
Yeah.
You got to trust his representation of his answer to you.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for joining us here on today's podcast. We hope you enjoyed our angry talk. And you can find on Facebook, Instagram, and X. And you can email us at route77ministries@gmail.com. That's ROUTE 77ministries@gmail.com. And you can tell us what you think. How do you get angry? How do you solve being angry? How has God helped you when you've been angry? Any anger thing or not.
Or
Let
if
us
you
know
have
what you
any
think.
or topics, anything that
Yeah,
you
if
would
you have
like
any
us to
topics that you want us to talk
drop
about,
us
let us know.
line. Yep, exactly.
Just
Tell your
find
friends
us,
about it.
pass it along, refer us to others. Everything helps. And thank you for listening. We hope to find you here again next time.
God bless.
Thank you for joining us today as we explored the complex world of anger. Whether it stems from personal expectations, singleness, or deeper spiritual struggles, understanding the root of our anger can lead us towards healing and growth. Remember, it's okay to bring your frustrations to God. He can handle them and guide us to resolution. Don't forget to connect with us on our social platforms and share your thoughts or topics you'd like us to cover. Until next time, keep seeking peace in all aspects of life. And remember to live your single life to its fullest.